Hello, my friends. You're tuned in to the Gardening Simplified radio, podcast, and YouTube show coming to you from Studio A at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. It's Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Well, let's talk about plant change. Some plants change dramatically over the course of the season. I suppose we could say most plants change from year to year, but some more dramatically than others. Or maybe it's like a retro pair of designer jeans. They just get more interesting when they're stonewashed, ripped, distressed. We'll find out today on the Gardening Simplified show when referring to a change in direction, position, or course of action. Many times people will say we're going to change tack, not T-A-C-T, tactics, but tack, T-A-C-K. It's a nautical term when we come about and we change course direction. And Stacy, I've got to mention right off the top that when we talk about plants that change course direction over the course of a year, in my mind, hydrangeas have got to be the queen.
Well, they definitely are the poster child for changing color. And I think that makes a lot of people think that other plants have that same ability.
Right.
But the fact is that unique ability for some hydrangeas to change their flower color based on the soil chemistry is pretty much unique to hydrangeas, to big leaf hydrangeas.
On the top of the list, but there are many other plants that go through changes too. Of course, I love the music of Billy Joel. Don't go changing to try to please me, or something like that. You never let me down before. But some plants do that. And by the way, as long as we're in the music realm, Karma Chameleon. You remember that song?
Oh, heck yeah, I do.
Yeah, Culture Club, Boy George. And Boy George said, basically, if you aren't true, if you don't act like you feel, then you get karma justice. That's nature's way of paying you back. But some plants just naturally like to change. And one that I think does a beautiful job of it is plants that have bract-like flowers, like dogwoods. They kind of, like hydrangeas, effortlessly go through the gears over the course of the season and become very, very interesting.
Yeah, same with another plant we talk about on the show a lot, which is Temple of Bloom Heptacodium.
Yes.
Another plant with bracts that change color through the season.
Good point. Virginia is a perennial that I love that changes through the season. Autumn fern is another one. Now, this is a great plant. It moves from gold orange to green to red orange, multi-hued in fall. And then Rodgersias. I don't know if you grow those in your landscape, Stacy. They need wet soil and shade, but the foliage on those plants are quite interesting, and they can kind of go through a metamorphosis over the course of the season, too.
Beautiful plant. My garden is way too sunny, way too dry to ever grow it. But I did see some fabulous Rodgersia many years ago in Ireland. And we were in this garden, my husband and I. It's pouring rain. We both have our hoods up on our raincoat because, it's Ireland. And I said, oh, my gosh, look at that Rodgersia. And he turned to me and he goes, New Jersey? Because he couldn't hear so well because of things. So you can't say Rodgersia without me thinking New Jersey.
I love that. Pyrrhus japonica, or some people would refer to it as lily of the valley shrub. Just brilliant red in spring and then transitions, of course, with the flowers too. That's a plant that changes throughout the year and goes through changes. Some of my favorite plants, Stacy, that go through changes during the season, I believe dramatically. We mentioned the hydrangeas, and I have to say oak leaf hydrangea is one of my favorites.
Very, very dynamic plant. Yes. Goes through a lot of different changes and does a lot of things. Mine are about to bloom, and they're looking fabulous, at least the blooms that the deer couldn't reach.
But you're not bitter about it.
No, I mean, it looks pretty good. It's, I'm happy about it. At least it got to that point. I'll take what I can get.
Others for big change, Itea, Fathergia, viburnums, blueberries, juneberry, ornamental kale, sedum flowers, how they go from a lime green to a green, and then red or pink, and then rust. And then, of course, a programming note here. I'm not recommending that you plant this plant, but we've all heard of the chameleon plant or rainbow plant. Now, again, I'm not advising you to put it in your landscape because it will become a permanent plant in your landscape. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. I think it's Houttenia.
Houttenia, yeah.
Yeah, Houttenia, something like that. Named after a Dutch naturalist, Martin Houttijn, I believe it is. Don't plant it, but it's a great plant that goes through these chameleon changes.
It has a weird smell. You like the smell of it?
No.
I don't particularly care for it either.
No, me either. Alternanthera, that genus has a lot of great plants in it, including a proven winner's burgundy threadleaf Joseph's coat. Some people look at that genus, or at least some of the plants in that genus, with the common name Joseph's coat. That tells you something about its change. And then a perennial Pulmonaria. I love Pulmonaria and how the flowers will change color over the course of the season. And as I understand it, at least I've read some studies that say that with Pulmonaria, when it's nectar rich, when the flowers are nectar rich, that's when they're that pinkish red hue, and then they move to a blue hue when they're going out of business.
Yeah, I've been thinking ever since you said the Billy Joel, "Don't go changing to try to please me" quote. I was thinking you could have said, "Don't go changing to try to please bees," because that is a reason that a lot of flowers change color. It indicates to pollinators, nope, no more pollen here. The deed has been done. I've been pollinated. Don't bother. But these flowers over here, we could still use your help with.
So when plants make changes in the landscape, they're trying to tell us something. Maybe they're not talking to the bees, but they're trying to teach us more about them. Stacy, of course, borage moving from pink to blue. 4 o'clocks, that's a plant that can change on a daily basis. I remember years ago getting into the gardening industry, the miracle of Peru. A lot of people used to plant that as a flowering annual, and great for attracting sphinx moths to the landscape. And then let me mention Superbell's Magic Pink Lemonade Calibrachoa. That is such a neat proven winner's plant, and it shifts its colorization throughout the season. It varies based on day length and the light levels that it's getting. So the blooms kind of move from lemon yellow and transition to a vibrant pink. That's Superbell's Magic Pink Lemonade Calibrachoa. Always something interesting happening in the landscape, Stacy, and the plants that change really add a lot of character to our landscape.
It's true. One of my absolute favorites that I fall in love with it anew every year is Decadence Pink Lemonade Baptisia.
Yes.
And I have a lot of the Decadence Baptisias that are from Proven Winners. I adore them. But this particular one does something that the rest of them don't. It starts off a really pretty pale yellow, and then as the blooms age, they turn pink. So you have this kind of bicolor look to it. And it just so happens that the yellow and pink go perfectly with the 2 yellow and pink, all pink Decadence Baptisia. As a combination, it is just beautiful. One of my absolute favorites.
I love that. Beautiful. Well, before we go to plants on trial, let me leave you with a limerick. Home on the range, where something's amiss and strange. My flowers change color, they were bright, now are duller. Their appearance they rearrange. Is this okay? Have they gone astray? A leopard may not change its spots, but the flowers sure are in my pots. It's a botanical melee. Let's see how Stacy ties this all together coming up next in Plants on Trial here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where the theme of the episode is all about plants that change. And of course, we all know that plants change. I mean, they start out small, they become something much larger by the end of the season, but we're not just talking about plants that just kind of undergo like an expected change. We're talking about plants that have an unexpected change.
Right.
Something that you don't expect to happen. And a lot of times when we talk about flower color changing, it is due to the flowers aging, which causes a change to the pH level in the flower, and that actually changes the flower color. So it's different than what will happen with big leaf hydrangeas where the flower color is going to be determined by the soil chemistry at the time that they set and open their flower buds. That's a totally different situation. So there's all of these different possible explanations. And it's a feature that plant breeders often capitalize on, as you've just heard us discuss, because it is very cool to watch that change and to have that extra element of surprise in the plant. And we have that in a number of our plants. I mean, of course, we have a ton of big leaf hydrangeas, which can change their color based on flower pH. We have a ton of panicle hydrangeas, which the flowers will turn some level of pink or red as they age, again, through that natural pH change within the flower. We have plants that change foliage color, not just in fall. A great example is a newer plant called Midnight Sun Weigela, which if you look at it in our trial garden right now, it's kind of starting to turn purple, and you're like, okay, that's cool. But within the next couple of weeks, it's going to turn all sorts of colors. This is an amazing plant to watch
Gorgeous
transform.
plant.
Never a dull moment. But, all of these things I feel like are expected. And when I was thinking about what plant to put on trial for this episode, I thought long and hard about it at first. And then I said, no, I just had an amazing experience with this plant over the last weekend that will make it the perfect plant on trial, because it's not that the flowers change. It's not that the foliage changes. It's that its scent changes when it is in bloom. And that
The
plant,
plot thickens.
yes, indeed. I'm not going to keep you in suspense any longer. That is Simply Sensational Calycanthus.
Wow.
Also known as sweet shrub. It is sometimes known as Carolina allspice. It is also sometimes known quite charmingly as Sweet Betsy. It's a native plant.
Sweet Betsy.
Like so many native plants, depending on where you are, they have all these different regional common names that just have developed over the years. But whatever you want to call this, I'm going to try to explain the fragrance, but it's very difficult to explain. So as you might have guessed by those common names like sweet shrub, it is very, very fragrant. And when we wanted to name this plant originally Simply Sensational, I was a bit of a curmudgeon about it. I was like, everyone says Calycanthus sweet shrub can be very, very different in its fragrance. It smells different. Some people don't smell it at all. We have Aphrodite, which is a beautiful hybrid Calycanthus, not just our native one, but a hybrid of the American and Asian ones that doesn't have really amazing fragrance. I mean, it has some fragrance. So I said, I don't know if we should stick our neck out on saying this thing is simply sensational, because it is a scent, SCENT, sensational.
Caught that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I was dubious. And then my boss dropped a flower on my desk, and that thing did not stop being fragrant for like days, even as it was drying out on my desk. So I fell in love, and I had to have this plant in my garden. Planted it about 3 years ago. And it was, it flowered and it did okay, but I was just like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not really getting a lot of fragrance. Well, over the last weekend, my husband and I were walking around the garden, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and it just, the fragrance just hit us like a wall. It was so strongly fragrant. And Adam said, "What is that?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, this thing is finally giving off fragrance after 3 years." I think that it just needed to have the resources to be well enough established. And as we're looking at the plant and looking at the flowers, I'm not even joking you, each flower on this plant smelled different. We were going around to each individual flowers. Some smelled like pineapple. Some smell like strawberries. Some smell like citrus. Some people will say bubblegum, strawberry. It's like the Willy Wonka flavor changing gum. So everything smells really, really different. It's all very sweet. It's all really, but like not like a sickly sweet fragrance, just like a beautiful planty fragrance. So we cut some stems and we continued to, sit outside and enjoy the beautiful day. And every time we went back to sniff these stems, it gave off a different scent.
Huh. Who knows? What's next?
It was so wild. I love fragrant plants, but honestly, most fragrant plants, like if I say, what's a lilac smell like? You can kind of conjure a scent memory of what a lilac smells like, because what a lilac smells like is what the lilac smells like from the beginning of its bloom until the end. And yes, it might be lighter or stronger depending on the weather and the age of the flower itself. But I cannot think of any plant that I have personally encountered, at least as a common garden plant here in North America, where its scent changes so much, not just from day to day, not just through the period of its bloom, but from minute to minute within a single flower.
Yeah, heliotrope does that to me, but not to that extent. That's incredible.
I'm growing heliotrope this year, and that's also a really, really wonderful fragrance. So the flowers are not what you would expect. They are burgundy, like a dark kind of brownish burgundy, beautiful color. I actually have it combined in my garden with my favorite 9-bark, ginger wine 9-bark, and together that is an absolutely glorious combination. Nice, glossy, textural foliage, but it's not the kind of plant where you would look at and go, oh, that looks like it's a fragrant plant. It's kind of like a sleeper hit like that, but it really is just incredible. And I mean, I was still kind of like beside myself at how unbelievable this was. Now, the fragrance is going to be strongest in the sun. I tried to bring some into the studio today so you could smell it, but our plants here at the office are in shade. They're in full shade, so they didn't have any fragrance kicking around yet. It does, again, tolerate some shade, if you want to grow it in part shade, but for the best fragrance, if you want that moment where you're just walking into a wall of fragrance, you're definitely going to want to make sure it's getting some full, bright sun for at least for ideally 6 or more hours every day, which is where mine, of course, is planted. Now, this is a plant that is native throughout the United States, pretty much the East Coast. So as far east as New York and Massachusetts, down to, say, roughly the Florida Panhandle, and over through like Tennessee. So basically the East Coast and southeast of North America. Understory shrub, growing, sort of at the edge of woods and that kind of thing. And that's sort of where it gets that range of light tolerance, because it's used to sort of those peaks through in the woods.
So at the start of the show, I talked about changing tack, the nautical term, and primarily done because the wind has changed direction. What do you think is the motivation of this plant to change fragrance?
Well, I don't know.
Is it trying to be more attractive to different types of pollinators?
I don't know. And actually, I meant to look up specifically what pollinates this in the wild. I could not tell you if what's happening is a natural characteristic of the plant or if it's actually related to our perception.
Yeah.
It might not be the plant itself, but it might be the way that our brains perceive it. And it just depends on the volatile oils, within the plant itself. I mean, it's kind of like if someone wears a perfume, it might smell wonderful on one person, but smell terrible on another, or through the day it changes. There's a lot of like complexity, chemical and olfactory complexity when it comes to fragrance. So I don't have an answer for that, but I can tell you it's enjoyable.
It's like when I run a marathon, I smell different at the end than I did at the beginning or the middle.
I'll bet you do. Especially depending on the weather. If it's full sun and a hot day, you're definitely going to be a lot more fragrant than if it was a cloudy and cool day.
Move along.
So that nice wide native range for this plant means that it is cold tolerant down to USDA Zone 4 and heat tolerant all the way up to USDA Zone 9. So a huge number of our listeners and watchers out there can enjoy this amazing plant. It's going to be about 6 feet tall by 4.5 feet wide, which is a nice size for most landscapes. So that's another thing that we look for when we are selecting for native shrubs. Can we get it to a size where it's actually useful in a suburban, or in a regular urban lot compared to, a really large wild specimen?
And deer resistant.
Extremely deer resistant. Very, very deer resistant.
Everyone should have one of these in their yard.
Now, I will say, when I was researching it a bit more to bring it to you on the show today, one of the North Carolina State University Extension website said, for best results, baby this plant for the first year after planting. I can tell you, I definitely did not do that. Now, the plant survived. It is established now, and it's looking amazing. But that might have a reason as to why it took 3 years for me to get the full fragrance off this plant. It was absolutely worth the wait. So if you want to try a Simply Sensational Calicanthus in your own yard, definitely take that advice. Be a little kinder to it as it's getting established than I was to mine. It still lived. It still looks great, but really, it's worth the wait if you do have to wait for that fragrance. But if you can, be a little bit more careful than I was, I would definitely recommend it.
I think we should change this segment from Plants on Trial to Story Time with Stacy.
I like that.
I like your stories.
Well, and again, I'm so excited about this plant because just when you have that experience, it really is amazing. Yeah. At least go to your garden center, check it out, and decide if it's going to earn a spot in your garden. You can see photos on our YouTube channel or at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. When we come back, we're opening up the mailbag, so please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show, where it's time for us to answer your gardening questions. And we are deep in gardening question season. All sorts of crazy stuff is happening out there. Good stuff, bad stuff, stuff that you might not know whether it's good or bad or what you should do about it. Well, we are here to help you, so you can reach us at help, H-E-L-P, at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. Or just go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We have a contact form there where you can just send us a message and ask us your question. And, you know, I did want to bring up that we've been doing a new video on YouTube called The Plant Panel. And in it, we make recommendations for plants for specific areas, for someone's specific, yard or garden. If you have something that you would like to submit for Plant Panel, just check out ProvenWinnersColorChoice.com. We have a special contact form just for that. And please do include a picture, and maybe we'll feature you on a future Plant Panel. It's been a huge, huge hit so far, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
Outstanding. I love it. Maintain your composture. We're here for you. Question from Terry today. And a picture. What's wrong with my tree? Is it salvageable? Well, Terry, we took a look at the picture, and Stacy, this is something that I see often in neighborhood developments where the soil is heavy clay. Terry has a maple tree there, and what I see, not only southwest disease on the trunk, which is not that big a deal and happened years ago, expansion and contraction of the bark, but if you look into the top of the tree, it's thinning. The leaves have dropped here in the month of June in the upper portion of the tree. As a matter of fact, the tree is dying at the top. Usually an indication of girdling roots. The tree is choking itself. And it reminds us that when we plant trees or put plants in heavy clay soil, that preparation is so incredibly important. I still contend we work organic matter into the soil 50-50 with the parent soil, as opposed to digging a hole, throwing some soil in it, and putting the plant in the ground. Those roots will start to circle, and someday down the road, you're going to pay the price, and I think that's what we're finding with Terry's tree here.
You know, there was for a very long time a sort of school of thought where the tree root ball was sacrosanct. You can't touch it. You can't do anything to it. And really, research over the past couple of years has shown that people will wash the roots. They will actually wash all the soil off of the roots and replant it. And that has been a good way to find defects in the tree rooting, which, it's not a deliberate thing that happens at nurseries, but it is something that can happen because that's outside of the natural conditions. So the tree roots can start growing around and around itself. And so it's not, if you notice a problem with the roots when you are planting the tree, fix it then. You aren't going to be able to fix it down the line, when the plant's already starting to struggle. And I thought it was interesting you talked about the heavy blue clay, because a lot of times when you have that really, really heavy, wet clay, in addition to, just causing drainage problems, that is what typically will encourage disease issues. And I did wonder if perhaps there was some issues of verticillium in this maple, because that sort of, whole branch dieback, large branches at the top is pretty common for verticillium. And verticillium is a soil fungus that's pretty ubiquitous, but it's only when it really gets going, because conditions are just right for it, that it can start causing real problems like this. So, Terry asks, is her tree salvageable? I don't actually think that it probably is.
Probably not. Now, at a cost, possibly it would be salvageable. I know arborists who actually use equipment that is used in finding landmines. And it's highly compressed air, and they'll blow all the soil out, like you mentioned when the plant was young, getting a look at the roots. And that can be done, but of course that's a lot of work, and there's a lot of expense involved, and probably not worth it. In addition to that, many people are taking the approach, as opposed to digging a round hole when initially planting, digging a square hole, a large square hole, and then again working organic matter 50-50 into that clay soil. So when the roots extend out, they're familiar with the soil and will penetrate into that soil. So an interesting question and picture. Thanks, Terry. We appreciate it. Shannon asks, thank you guys for a great show. I look forward to hearing every episode. I have a rose bush that has come out beautifully this spring. However, it has one really long cane that is shooting up like a wild hair. Oh, I have that too. Should I prune it now? Not me personally. I have a rose like that. Should I prune it now and just shorten it, or should I go to the base and cut it off there, or do I just let it go until spring? It's a 3-year-old own root rose. There are buds on the rest of the plant. Thanks for your advice in advance.
So this is a scenario that is called doglegging. Well, at least that's what Judson, our new plant development manager, calls it. That's what they call it in the South. And it's an appropriate, appropriate name. And you see it on roses. You will also see it on abelia. There's some other plants too. And it's just like, you're growing along, everything looks good. And then all of a sudden the shoot just decided to be like an overachiever and pop right out. But it's not a cause for concern. It really is just a matter of, typically what I think happens is that the bud was created a little bit later in the season, and the plant is just mature enough that it has the energy, and it just puts a ton of energy into that bud. And so you do get that wild growth. There is absolutely no harm in just cutting that thing back to within the plant body, or cutting it out entirely. If it's something like an abelia, which kind of naturally grows as a little mound, just cut it back into the body of the plant. That's fine. But for a rose, where you're really typically working more for an overall shape, I would probably take it out to the ground, but it really is up to each of you. It's not going to cause the plant any harm to cut it off. And it's just, again, it's just something that happens. I don't have a really, really good explanation for it. It's just the way plants grow.
Yeah, I agree, Stacy. Sometimes we'll see this also on weeping cherries right at the graft, and you'll see it shoot up. I call them water sprouts, but he calls them dog legs.
Well, so it's not like a water sprout because it's not coming really necessarily from the trunk. It's just like coming from within the body of the plant, and it's just like a wild shoot. Like the plant's like all there, a nice little tidy tuffet. And then this one plant, this one stem or whatever just decides to go rogue.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that Shannon told us that it's an own root rose.
Yes,
if it was an older grafted rose, potentially could be from the wild rootstock down below.
Right. So that, and that's what you're seeing like on the cherry. Yeah. So anytime you have a grafted plant, the roots are going to be much stronger than the top plant.
Yes.
So the growth, any growth that comes from that bottom stalk or root stalk is naturally going to be more vigorous than whatever's coming from the top or a desirable part. So that was a very, very useful thing to include, Shannon. So go ahead, cut it off or not, whatever you prefer. You're not going to hurt the rose. Just make it look so that you can stand it and you're not going, that darn shoot's driving me crazy every time I look out at it.
Thank you very much, Shannon. We appreciate it. Great question. Cheryl writes, I'm wondering what to do with a lilac bush that is channeling its inner giraffe. I know the arborvitae that it's planted near is shading it too much and most likely causing the stretch for the sun. My question is how, when, if to prune. It does have some new shoots coming out of the ground, which I'm hoping you can see in the picture. Should I cut the big part down and let the energy go to the shoots?
Yeah.
We see this often in landscapes, Stacy, with lilacs or other sun-loving plants where eventually shade takes over.
Yes, it does. And what you're seeing in Cheryl's photo, if you're watching this on YouTube or checking us out at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, is a very common thing for lilacs. Mm-hmm. It is actually the way that a lilac shrub would naturally expand in nature, having those new shoots. And it's just the way that the plant is regenerating itself, the way that it is basically keeping younger, new, and more productive wood, because older wood typically becomes less productive in terms of flower over time. So there's nothing wrong with what's happening. Lilacs do this. It's not like, it is, I guess, essentially suckering, but I think a lot of people, when they think of suckers, are thinking about like a crabapple, growing all around the base, or something that grows at a distance from the parent plant. And that's not exactly what's happening here. It's just the lilac putting out new growth so it can keep, being an alive and full and floriferous plant. So, when I look at Cheryl's photo, you can see that the older stems are leaning forward. I would definitely not personally cut out the old stems. I like the look of them. I love like a mature lilac. It just gives everything a sense of place. Now, if you want to take those old stems out, you can, and that new growth that's coming out will take over for the whole plant in time. And, 20 some years down the line, it will be that old growth. But this is really a matter of your personal preference. If you want to take the growth out, it really doesn't matter what time of year it is. It doesn't matter if the plant blooms on old or new wood. If you want that growth out, just take it out. Get your loppers, take it right out at the ground. I would not recommend cutting them back to encourage like a lot of branching and kind of like a witch's broom type of look. If you want to take them out, I would take them out all the way at the base. If you don't want to take them out, I would let them grow and let them fill in.
Yeah, I call that the little off the top method, and I don't like that method either. So be decisive, prune, lilacs rejuvenate based on pruning. And if you wanted to throw some blooms next year, well, the optimum time would be to prune right after lilacs are done blooming. But as Stacy said, if this job needs to get done, just get it done whenever it is.
And, the other thing is there is no urgency. So if you want to live with it for a little while and think about it, there is no harm in that. You can always prune it up later. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we have a special guest, so please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. It's time for branching news, and this week we interview Stephanie Walker. Stephanie Walker has a beautiful book out called How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces. I know that's something that a lot of folks struggle with, and we're hoping to get some pointers here from Stephanie. Again, Stephanie Walker. If you look for her book, it's called How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces. Stephanie, thanks for joining us on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Stephanie, in writing this book, what were your experiences and your inspirations that were influential in getting you to write the book, How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces?
Well, it's really interesting how it came about. I received an email from someone with a Simon & Schuster email address one day, and they asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book. I thought it was spam. I thought, this is not real. Nobody does that. So I kind of ignored it. And then I got a couple more emails, and I realized they were serious. So I kind of gave it my attention for a little bit and thought about, what, if I were to write this book, what would it be and what would I do? And so, I have always loved gardening, except when I was little, because gardening meant weeding on the weekends, and I hated that. But as I grew older and just knew that I loved to have living things around me, and especially flowers, then I became excited about gardening. And I had an aunt, my Aunt Camilla, who is an amazing gardener, and she always had beautiful gardens. And I always just kind of aspired to have gardens like she did. So she really, throughout my life, has inspired me in flowers especially, but in gardening in all aspects.
Oh, I love that. That's great. There's always a story behind the story. And to help lay the groundwork here, Stephanie, we have viewers and listeners all over the place. And so we want to figure out where you're gardening. Where are you practicing some small space gardening?
Okay, so I am in Queen Creek, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. It's on the east side of the valley in Phoenix. And so I am gardening in 115-degree temperatures this summer, up to 120. Yeah. And I am able to have amazing success with flowers and other plants, and even my vegetable garden in full sun, planting strategically for some things, especially tomatoes, to make sure that they're shaded. But if it's going to require a lot of babysitting, I'm not going to do it. I'm like passive least resistance gardener. I want to make sure that I have the most beautiful output with the least exertion throughout the summer. So I'm really strategic in what I plant.
Oh, that is great. So what is the best strategy? What's the best way to set up for success in a small space? I would guess that soil preparation is just as important in a small space as it is in a large one.
Oh, it is absolutely the most important. My favorite thing when I'm teaching workshops and classes, and when I'm doing consultations with clients, I stress to them, don't treat your soil like dirt. Like, in other words, make sure that you are paying as much attention to your soil as you are to your plants, because really, if we feed our soil is what feeds our plants, and we can have the most healthy plants from the best soil that we can possibly have. So I feel like the best way to set ourselves up for success is to believe that we can. First of all, I think going into it and knowing that it's possible, especially in different climates where there's harsher weather, or, you know, even whatever, we all have different environments where we are. So just believing that you can, and then following your local planting calendar that comes from your extension office, or, you know, your zone, checking with the USDA and seeing what your growing zone is. Those things will really set you up for success, and making sure, especially in my climate, that I have an automated watering system, because I don't want to be out there hand watering when it's super hot. So making sure that I have something set up where my irrigation comes on automatically makes a big difference.
Well, you know, I think what you said about believing that you can is so important, especially for small spaces, because a lot of people, if they're downsizing or whatever, they're like, oh, I love gardening, but it's just not worth it with this small space. And I think your book really shows that it's absolutely worth it, and that you can have something really colorful, really beautiful, that really actually expresses your personal style, regardless of how small the space is. And in some ways, having a small space can be a real gift.
It really, yeah, it can, because it's less overwhelming, but totally believing you can. And small spaces, it's so worth it, because anything living, any plant, if we're just in proximity to it, in its presence for 20 minutes, studies show that it elevates our moods. It can increase serotonin. So having living things around us, being able to garden regardless of the space, is so beneficial for us as humans.
Yeah, no question about it. So what are some plants that, in your experience, and by the way, folks, we're chatting with author Stephanie Walker, and her new book came out in April this year, How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces, an illustrated guide to planning, planting, and caring for your small space flower garden. Let's talk about flowers a moment. Stephanie, what are some of your favorites for a small space?
Oh my gosh. My favorite flower is any flower that's blooming, like whatever is in season that is showing off. That's my favorite flower. And it brings me joy every time I see a new plant start to bloom. But some of my favorite flowers for small spaces are anything that has an upright growth pattern. So think of zinnias, sunflowers, cosmos. Right now for the summer, in the spring, it's your bulb plants, irises, lilies, ranunculus, anemones, hyacinths, daffodils, and tulips, those kinds of things. If it's not going to spread and it doesn't require a whole lot of space, it's going to be optimal for a small space. But if you do have something that's a vining plant, it's always awesome to put something on a trellis. It just adds interest, to bring height to your garden, to kind of make something look a little more majestic than what it might in a small space. So vining plants are always a good option. Climbing roses, like an ivy or something, but something that can draw your eye heavenward. It's always a good strategy.
So in a nutshell, Stephanie, you have found, and I would agree with you, that success in gardening in small spaces is taking advantage of and using airspace, going up, going vertical, right?
Yes, absolutely. Always. Yeah.
Now, it seems like a lot of your advice in the book is about growing flowers from seed. Do you think, is that especially challenging for you in Arizona? Is that a money-saving technique? Why is that sort of one of your approaches on that?
Definitely a money-saving technique. I feel like you can optimize your growing power by buying a seed packet for $3.50, where you can get 50 plants versus, going to your garden center or wherever it is, the nursery, and buying a 6-pack of plants for $4, where you just have 6 6 plants. And I have a small flower farm, so I'm also growing on a larger scale. So using seeds is money saving for me. But also here in Arizona, our climate is amazing where we're gardening 365 days of the year. And so germination is not typically a problem here. So I do tend to grow a lot by seed, but I also see the value in transplants where you have a shorter growing season. Sometimes maybe that transplant really jump starts the length of time to bloom on a plant or whatever. So transplants definitely are a wonderful option. And I do grow from transplants a lot, but just money wise, seeds are super savers in that respect.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been watching the national news, the weather, and the temperatures in Las Vegas and Arizona. My word. So if gardening's 365 days out of the year for you guys, maybe you might want to take June and July off.
We definitely do. And that's, definitely my vegetable garden slows down in June and July. I never stop planting flowers just because they bring me so much joy. So I'm always got flowers going. But like I said, I am path of least resistance. So I'm making sure that I'm growing varieties that don't need a lot of deadheading, don't need a lot of tending to, so that I can just enjoy their beauty. I can cut them and bring them inside my home and make sure that, I'm just surrounded by them. But yeah, definitely slow down in June and July.
So what's really going crazy? What's really going bananas right now, despite the extreme climate the extreme challenges you guys are dealing with right now? Like what makes you go, yeah, I'm glad I planted that?
Oh, definitely the zinnias. Zinnias are always that just fun, beautiful pop of color. I love sunflowers. Celosia is another one that is just, it brings just a different texture and a different element to my garden. But one of my favorite summer flowers is Lisianthus, which is super drought tolerant, heat resistant. It's so good. So, and it has a huge, phenomenal vase life. So Lisianthus is one of my very favorites for the summer. I will never not grow Lisianthus. But yeah, there's cosmos, marigolds we've got going right now. Of course, our spring flowers are done, but we've got the seasons, but making sure that I plant those flowers that can handle the heat, that's key. And I think that's key for any gardener, making sure that you're not frustrating yourself by planting the wrong thing at the wrong time, making sure that you've got a knowledge of what should be growing in your area at this moment is key.
Yeah, and Stephanie, you make a great point. If you're gardening in small spaces, it doesn't mean you cannot grow cut flowers to bring indoors and enjoy. And I really appreciate your perspective on that. Her name is Stephanie Walker. Her beautiful new book is called How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces. Stephanie, before we let you go today, wanted to ask you, we ask most folks this question that we interview. Give us your favorite flower, your favorite plant. We ask that because it's a very unfair question. So let me ask you that question. If you had to pick one, what is it?
Right now it is Lisianthus for me. For the summer flower, I love Lisianthus. It's beautiful. It has kind of like a shape that's reminiscent of a rose, but it brings so much beauty. So right now, it's that. Ask me next week. It could be something different, depending on what's blooming.
Now, I do have to ask you with the Lisianthus, are you growing that in your home flower garden, or is that primarily for your cut flower farm? Because of course I know the plant. It is beautiful. People love it when they see it in an arrangement, but I haven't really seen it grown as a garden plant so much.
I do both. I have it in my landscape and I have it in my flower field. And in the landscape, it's beautiful. It's something that in my book, I kind of discuss. There's a table that kind of shows you positions of plants and where to put them in your garden if they're background, middle, or foreground. So with those Lisianthus, they're kind of more towards the background because they can get pretty tall. But and sometimes they might need help standing up. You might need to stake them or provide some support. But they are a beautiful landscape flower bed plant. And so, yeah, I kind of have those towards the back of my beds and then kind of stair-stepping down in height depending on what the flower is, but they are a beautiful background flower in a garden.
Well, and they're not one I would think of as being particularly heat tolerant. Right. To look at them, it's really interesting to find out that they are thriving in your extreme heat.
Yeah. Oh, they are so good. And like I said, for a cut flower, their vase life is like 10 to 14 days. They're phenomenal. Like that's like the biggest bang for your buck flower almost, because they last forever.
Oh, that's interesting. Page 98 and 99, Lisianthus in Stephanie Walker's beautiful new book, How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces. If folks want to learn more or find the book, what's your recommendation, Stephanie?
So I would say Simon & Schuster on their website. It's available. It's available through Barnes & Noble. If your Barnes & Noble is not carrying it, you can request it and they can order it in for you. Of course, it's on Amazon. It's pretty much almost everywhere books are sold. You can get it. So yeah, it's a great book. I love it.
Fantastic. It is a beautiful book. Stephanie Walker, How to Grow Flowers in Small Spaces. Stephanie, stay cool there in Arizona and take care of yourself. And thanks so much for joining us on the Gardening Simplified show.
Oh, you are so welcome. Thank you for having me. And thank you for looking at my book and helping to get the word out. It's awesome.
Have a great summer.
Thank you. You too.
Well, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to complain about the heat here in Michigan ever again after talking to Stephanie. So I am certainly inspired, and I hope all of you are as well. So thank you to Stephanie. Thank you, Rick. Thanks to Adriana. And of course, as always, thanks to all of you for listening. We really appreciate it. Have a great week ahead.